And I'll go ahead and pass it over to Kevin to get us kicked off.
Awesome. Thank you, Liz. Can you guys hear me okay? All good? Yeah. All right. Yeah. So as mentioned, my name is Kevin Bluer, and I'm joined by Tim Coulter. Both of us from Truffle, all of us from Truffle, I should say. And the title of this session is The Future of Blockchain Solution Development. So hopefully you're in the right place. Can I jump through? There we go. So in terms of agenda for this webinar, we'll start in a moment with bios, very brief bios of Tim and myself. Do a little bit of housekeeping. Then we'll do a very brief Truffle refresher. Now we are assuming a little bit of prior knowledge of Truffle for this session, so this will be very brief, but if you are new or it's been a while since you've used it, that will just kind of top you up. And then we'll get to the kind of main first part of this. There's two main pieces to this. The first will be looking at 4 emerging trends, specifically in building solutions or blockchain-based solutions. Now, as a caveat before we even get to it, this is just 4 that we've picked that are kind of on our radar. There's a lot more. There's tons going on in this space, of course. And then the next kind of second half is going to be around looking at some of the new and upcoming stuff we've got going on in Truffle. Some of the new products, features, and some of the new kind of upcoming integrations that we've got as well. And then we'll kind of close out with a brief announcement around TruffleCon, our yearly conference, and then wrap up with Q&A. Just briefly on the Q&A stuff, as Liz kind of mentioned just before we started, if you have questions throughout, just feel free to ping them into the chat window. If it's something that's a kind of quick clarification or the audio drops off or something like that, feel free to ping it in and we'll address it real time. Liz will kind of jump in. If it warrants a bit of a longer answer or discussion, then we'll save it to the end, just so as not to interrupt the flow too much. All right, so very briefly, bios of both Tim and myself, starting with myself. So my name is Kevin Bluer. I'm the head of developer curriculum and training here at Truffle. I probably have about 15 years, getting a little older now, in terms of development experience across different stacks. Probably about 3 to 4 years specifically on blockchain and Ethereum development, and certainly over 5, probably 5 to 6 in terms of training developers amongst doing other things. So it's a big passion of mine, and certainly biggest part of my role with here at Truffle. So with that, I'll pass over to Tim to introduce himself.
Yeah, hi there, Tim Coulter, founder and CEO of Truffle. Started building it back in 2015 when Ethereum, before Ethereum mainnet was even launched, was originally looking to build tools for myself to help build blockchain applications. And it turns out that it's turned into one of the most popular development tools for Ethereum and now other blockchains, as we're going to tell you about soon. My background is in software testing and developer support. So if you include Truffle, that's about, I think, 12 years of building tools and testing frameworks and performing other tasks to help developers get their job done. And it was great. It's been great being able to do that for the Ethereum community.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim. All right. So quick poll. So now that I'll hand over to Liz, and hopefully this will work, using the built-in as a polling feature in Zoom. So you should see, I'm not seeing it yet, so it may be because I'm presenting, I don't see it. So you should see a quick poll, and it's uber simple. It's basically, have you used Truffle before? And
yeah, we're having a little bit of an issue with the Zoom feature. So
okay.
Like Kevin said, the question is just if you've had experience with Truffle, yes or no. If you could ping it into the chat, either yes or no, if you've had experience with the Truffle suite before. And that includes any of our tools, so either Truffle, Ganache, or Drizzle. Awesome, we got a yes from Marcus. Wow, lots of yeses, and I love it. Thank you.
That's great. That's awesome.
Awesome. A couple people haven't. Very cool.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, guys.
Awesome. Good to see that.
So it was kind of a bit too fast there for me to kind of get a gauge. Maybe like 60, 2/3 as a ballpark. Where yeses maybe a bit higher. But as I said, either way, it's fine. And we've got a quick refresher now, just for those that are new or haven't used it in a while. So cool. Just before we get to that housekeeping, as I think Liz mentioned this already, in case you've just joined, we will be recording this session. So if you do need to drop off early, or you want to watch it again in the future, or if you're watching it for the first time, pre-record or post-recording, welcome. As mentioned as well, it is a bit more of an intermediate level session, and we will go at a steady pace. We are assuming a little bit of experience with Truffle, but I think you'll still get a good bunch if you are kind of newer to the space. This is also the second in our series of webinars this year, and it's something we're going to start, or intending to start doing probably on around a kind of monthly cadence. And on that note, if there's any topics you'd like to see covered, we'd love to hear from you. So, and what you will get is a feedback email from Liz post this session, so you can just reply to that. We'll also include the link to the recording as usual these days. But you can just ping back, one-liner. I'd love to see X being talked about, and yeah, we will listen, because we do want to do these around things that people want to hear. So yeah. All right. So yeah, as mentioned, very brief Truffle refresher. One slide gets developers from or Truffle, I should kind of prefix. It's designed to get developers from an idea for a decentralized app to actually completion and build, having built that decentralized app or DApp as comfortably as possible. So Truffle itself, as a kind of overall suite, is comprised of a range of different tools and components, starting with Truffle, the command line tool, which was, I guess, Tim, the original tool that you created back in the day. Since then, it's blossomed into more. So Ganache, which is a local blockchain, personal blockchain that you can use for actually as part of the building process, while you're building, testing, etc. And then Drizzle itself, which is a React.js based library. But we are in the sort of stages of decoupling the dependency on React.js, but as of right now, it's React.js based. But as mentioned in the slide, they all play different roles in the development lifecycle. So for building your decentralized app, we're 100% free and open source. We're listed, our organization on GitHub org is github.com/Truffle Suite. And as of last week, for Truffle alone, I think we had 1.7 million downloads. And I think, Tim, cumulatively, it was about 3 million. Is that right?
Yeah, which is pretty amazing to see. Humbling for me, at least.
Yeah, and we obsess over these numbers as people do. We're all stat analytics geeks when it comes to all this stuff. Yeah, cool. So hopefully, if you are new, or that was a useful refresher on what Truffle is. Who's using Truffle as a tool, or as a suite? Some companies listed here. Did you want to add a few words, Tim, on, because some of these are a little newer, kind of partnerships and so on?
Yeah, if we had more time, I would go into each thing that every company listed here is doing. There's a story behind each one. Obviously, it's companies you recognize. A lot of bigger ones there who are getting into the blockchain space. So it's really exciting to see them not only adopt blockchain, but use Truffle as their tool of choice.
Absolutely. Cool. Okay, so now we'll turn our attention to kind of the first main half of this webinar, where we'll look at 4 emerging trends, obviously within the context of blockchain solution development, of course. So the first trend is that the managed blockchain space, or blockchain as a service, or BAAS, which is not the greatest acronym, is exploding, and exploding in a positive sense, as in really taking off. So I'm just going to move this little, I can see all our heads, but it's blocking some of my text on the slides there. Yeah. So just to clarify what we mean by managed blockchain in this case, it's kind of the opposite of permissionless blockchain. So if you think of Ethereum in the mainnet sense, that's permissionless. Anyone can spin up a node, pull down the entire ledger, use and abuse it, build decentralized apps, push them up there, etc. Managed blockchains are permissioned, and they can manifest themselves as either private or consortium networks. Consortiums being networks that are set up between trusted or semi-trusted organizations. Big caveat, of course, is spinning this up and kind of orchestrating this between just different companies is pretty hard from a technology perspective. So what we've started to see is service providers kind of enter the fray and make in the kind of cloud provider sense, make it orders of magnitude easier. We've listed a few there. So Microsoft with their kind of cloud suite, Azure. A couple of weeks back announced their managed blockchain service. They did have a few things like bubbling away prior, but it's almost like a bigger push into the space for them. Kaleido, which is a consensus company, also been building out their stack, which is blossoming amazingly. And then Amazon with AWS, they've also got a managed blockchain service, which again is a few kind of announced a couple of months back and kind of went live quite recently. So obviously, huge names, which is awesome. And we've got links in there. And again, I think, either the deck will be sent out and or you can just Google it or search them. Don't worry about writing them down now. But anyway, more the point is, why is this important? Because, hopefully it will lead to increased adoption of solutions in the space, which is amazing. Hopefully start to realize some of the promise of the potential of this paradigm and the things you can do. Also, perhaps equally importantly, is just general investment in the space or the ecosystem. Obviously, what we referenced is kind of infrastructure, or at least hosting of infrastructure, but increased investment in tooling and innovation in the broader sense, just stuff going on. So it's obviously a very, very positive trend to have some of these bigger names come into the space. Anything to add there, Tim?
Yeah, so I think that if you look at these larger players, they're coming in the blockchain space for two reasons. One is that blockchain itself and blockchain technology is turning out to be a very interesting, I won't say tool, a very interesting platform for future, perhaps the future of computing. And so if you're the cloud provider, you see there's a great opportunity for you to run the computers and nodes needed to back the networks. But also, if they're getting into the space because this is exactly what clients are asking for. It's what enterprises and larger companies are asking for. So if you look at the difference between a public ledger and a permissioned ledger, the permissioned ones exist because you see all these enterprises and they want the benefits of blockchain, and they want to start using blockchain technology in their internally and as they interact with other companies in the world. But they want to make sure that they can protect their business. So privacy is a really big feature for them, and that's why you're seeing some of these bigger players come in.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Tim. So next up, trend number 2. Major companies are releasing some exciting FOSS, or free and open source software. So the first one we've listed here isn't exactly brand new, Quorum, which is a fork of Ethereum maintained by JP Morgan. But it's a great example because, obviously they've put some pretty interesting research and additional stuff into it, which has led to it becoming the most popular consortium chain or client that you would use to, host a consortium chain or host a node. It's also formed as the backbone for and this is, I think, on a private network, as I understand it, their JPM coin, which is a kind of, I say right now, it's an internal thing. From what I've read, they are intending to have some form of bridge between their private or maybe ultimately a consortium network and some more public facing stuff. So we'll see how that plays out. But either way, it's an open source thing. They've put some great innovation on top of it, such as the ability to sort of send private transactions, which is something you can't do on the public mainnet, at least right now. It's very hard. More recent examples of, in quotes, exciting FOSS, and these are literally announced in the last few weeks and months, include Ernst & Young's Nightfall. And if you haven't seen that announcement yet, it's actually not launched yet or made open sourced yet. But what it is a ZK Snarks framework for conducting zero-knowledge proofs on Ethereum mainnet, or the public permissionless network, which will allow people to essentially conduct private transactions on the mainnet. So they're kind of making a bit of a bet there on being able to conduct some of their business on the mainnet, which is interesting in and of itself.
I want to
go ahead, Tim. Please.
I want to jump in there on that one. So the reason why Nightfall is so cool, like as you said, it's permissioned permission transactions on mainnet, or being able to make permission transactions that are stewarded by mainnet. It's great for permissioning, but if you look again at what enterprises want, like there's this really exciting potential future where the whole world is interacting on either a one network to rule them all, or a network of networks that are all interconnected and interacting in completely new ways. It's like a level up of the internet. And so if you can provide a way for enterprises to have the privacy that they need while also the connection to the public network, like that feels like the next step.
Yeah. And oh yeah, so on to the next one. So yeah, two other frameworks recently released by Microsoft. The Ion framework. Neither of these I've looked at too heavily, but they both caused a bit of a splash in terms of announcements. Ion's a decentralized identity framework, and then CCF, again, I haven't looked at it, but or at least in too much depth, and it's really, really brand new, but allows you again to add layers of additional confidentiality to transactions. Bigger point here, of course, is this is super exciting. It's big companies getting into the space in meaningful ways, and just kind of summarize that in terms, again, for each of these we explain or try to explain why this is important. So innovation that in theory benefits all of us, right? This is, whether you're wherever you sit ideologically on, this is good, a good trend, we would argue. And it also just further legitimizes the tech, the paradigm, the space, as kind of Tim was alluding to, whichever path it ultimately takes. I
want to add a story about Quorum. Quorum was really exciting. As far as I know, the first blockchain that added permission. And they decided that when they were building it, they were going to follow the Ethereum spec so closely that as far as Truffle's concerned, we couldn't tell that it was any different from whether or not you're running an Ethereum mainnet or Ethereum node or a Quorum node. And that was a good choice on their part, because it brought the tools that everyone was using at the time and still use, to toot my own horn, I suppose, to this permission network, to enterprises, and gave enterprises a path forward into the blockchain space.
Great. Okay, so trend number 3.
Oh, wait, 1 second. We have a question in the chat. Is Infura considered a blockchain as a service? At first, so Infura's been around for a long time. Infura's been around for as long as Truffle. At first, I would say not necessarily. So especially early on in the blockchain world, in the Ethereum space, in order to get people using your blockchain application who are not already part of the ecosystem, who didn't have a wallet already, who didn't have a connection to a node, Infura allowed people just go to a website and read data from the blockchain. It basically provided the website a connection to a node, which was great. However, from what I know of where they're moving now, they're definitely moving into that space. Infura is one of the major backbones of Ethereum, and one of the reasons why the popularity, Ethereum applications are able to exist at the moment. So they're definitely trying to restructure the way that it's built internally. Perhaps become, don't quote me, but this is just what I've heard, a decentralized blockchain service. So they could be getting into that space.
Cool. Okay, so trend number 3, the end user experience is getting, in brackets, steadily better. So what we mean by the end user experience is kind of any interaction with kind of any chain from an end user, as a real person. And we say there's still some hurdles. It's not perfect, but it is getting better. And some recent examples to kind of just call out of this. And there's many. There's a lot of innovation happening around this, but 2 that kind of come onto our radar. One is this concept of burner wallets. So there's a great kind of initiative, or you could almost say experiment, and I wasn't there personally, but I've just read some of the synopsis of it all and some of the posts that were put out, but around burner wallets. So ETH Denver, I think upon arrival, you were instructed to go to xdai.io, and what that would do is set up a wallet, and it was connected to a sidechain, but with super low latency in terms of lower latency in terms of transactions and so on, and it was used as the currency during the event or the conference. Point really here, and there's some really good posts I'd recommend checking out if it piques your interest. But the point being is just the ease of user experience at this point. Literally, just go to your URL in your phone's browser, and boom, you're good to go. And I think they then topped up your wallets, and you could use that as the currency during the event. Which for me personally was like, wow, that's super cool, because tons of possible, things, other events, not even just techie events. Obviously, then there is a techie thing by definition, but, future, festivals or whatever it might be, kind of same principle. And you would never put tons of money on them, because by virtue of the name being burner, they're kind of throwaway and disposable. So once you've kind of, at the end of the event or whatever, either if if you're a vendor there, hosting a concession stand, you can literally kind of convert back the XDAI via a bridge back to DAI on Ethereum's mainnet, and in turn, DAI being a stable coin, convert it back to USD or currency of choice. So a really nice workflow for kind of offboarding to kind of cooler or cold storage, for where you wouldn't want to store higher value assets. But either way, super cool, super interesting, and definitely kind of under that, end user experience kind of bracket. Next up, and this is a little more techie, is a new opcode launched in Constantinople, it's a little more Petersburg, which opened up some interesting opportunities in that apps can now kind of create or infer a contract's address before it's actually created. What that means is you can actually transfer assets to someone, be those tokens or coins or, in-game something, things to someone before they've even joined, before they even have an address, which is, again, subtle but important, because historically you need to know it. They'd need to have a wallet somehow. And then they need to have shared it with you, etc. It's a logistical thing, but it arguably holds things back a little bit. And there's something I saw, a presentation from within Consensus where someone's really started to really push hard on that workflow, that, not just creating the address, but then or inferring the address, but then inviting someone, via email, and then they, it sets them all up. Again, from an onboarding perspective, really, really, makes that, order of magnitude better. So why is this important? Just kind of continue that theme. Frictionless onboarding means ultimately increased user adoption of everything in this space. And that applies to, and again, these are just two examples, but, the user experience is getting a lot better, slowly but surely.
And user experience is really the killer feature, the most needed thing for the blockchain world, because really, especially in these examples, like using a burner wallet, using a new way of transacting with people, you are asking people to do something very different than what they're used to. For instance, personally, I love using my credit card, and in order to have people use or to persuade people to use a different system, we have to make it super easy. And of course, this is all new tech, and there's cryptography behind it, and mathematics and that sort of thing. And so it's really great to see this kind of work happen.
Absolutely. Cool. So trend number 4. And this is segueing or building up to a segue into the second part when we dive a bit more into some of the stuff we've got going on at Truffle and beyond. But trend number 4, tooling is rapidly evolving. So we started on this one just by referencing the impact stack. Now, if you haven't come across that, all the technologies in the impact stack are listed there. Someone mentioned Infura earlier on, and at the end of it, the last letter is Truffle and a bunch in between. That's not to say these are the only things out there. On the contrary, there is tons of stuff going on, tons of projects and companies and services and so on. But called this one out and actually cited a quote from a post by Andrew Keys, someone from Consensus, on 19 predictions from this year. And he kind of predicted impact stack being, a core part of the infrastructure needed for Web 3.0. As mentioned, just to reiterate, there's tons going on. This is by no means it. Please go ahead, Tim. Yeah.
Oh, so Kevin, I remember back in the day when the impact stack used to be called the Tim stack, which I liked very much. So at the time, it was Truffle, Infura, MetaMask, which was a great pairing. But as you can tell, the stack has grown.
So it's grown, and then we had to reorder the letters a little bit, but I like that. And just to clarify what we mean by stack, it's a bundling of technologies, analogous to, I just called out to in the kind of Web 2.0 world being Mean or Jamstack. And I love both of those too, where I'm wearing my Web 2.0 hats. And of course, in the spirit of tooling, we put Truffle, we put a little smiley faced, but sincerely, we are pushing hard on our tooling as well. And we'll see some more of examples of that in a moment. The new extension to VS Code and TRUFFLE Teams, etc. That's really kind of coming in the next section. But again, why is this important? Stacks being bundles of complementary technologies that work well together, and and so on. Make developers' lives easier, doing stuff easier, and that of course increases the likelihood of people building stuff or experimenting and just getting familiar with it. So it's an important trend, and one we're start to see seeing happening in this space more and more. Whether impact remains the acronym of the future, or maybe there's plenty of room for more, we'll see. But again, it's more just exploring trends at the moment.
And yeah, I'd like to give a shout out to the Truffle team. We are now releasing weekly. As far as the rapidly evolving, we're listening to your needs and the features that you want, and the team is pushing out new versions extremely quickly, which is super exciting. This VS Code extension released by Microsoft. I just want to also give a shout out to Microsoft. As we mentioned Microsoft a couple times already, but they are doing tons of work in the blockchain space. The new Microsoft, led by Satya Nadella, is one that embraces open source software and pushes it forward. So we're seeing them participate extremely heavily in this whole space, which is super exciting. This mentions a way to do tools easy within VS Code. Actually,
it's okay.
I believe I'm cutting some slides.
Yeah, no worries,
we have that coming. And I'm super excited about Truffle Teams as well.
That's a perfect segue, Tim. So next up, let's go now segueing, as you mentioned, into the sort of second half of this webinar, where we'll take a look at some of the new stuff we've got going on within Truffle. The three things we're going to look at first, before we look at integrations and so on, is Teams, as Tim mentioned. We'll then do a quick dive in and have a quick walk through the extension and see how you can essentially interact with Truffle and other things from directly within an IDE. And close out by looking at a new kind of lower level thing within Truffle that we're calling Truffle DB. So Truffle Teams. So with that, I'll hand over to you, Tim, to kind of dive into this one.
Yeah, so this is one of my favorite things to talk about right now. So what we've been looking at our suite of tools and what they can do and what they're capable of. They have taken the Ethereum and blockchain communities to the point where people are actually deploying applications into production, and then getting to the point where they need to manage those applications. And if we look at our tooling, it's gotten people that far, but we needed to. But there are more things that our users need. And a question I like to ask is, so you've gotten to the point where you've deployed 1.0 to mainnet or your consortium network, whatever you prefer. You've deployed 1.0 to production. So what happens next? For instance, there's questions about who is using your application, how many people are using it, how many transactions are coming in through your contracts, are there any erroneous transactions? How do you understand if there was an error and what happened? Is your front end actually talking to the blockchain correctly? There are a lot of questions that developers don't know or can't answer as applications mature, and so we're building a product to help answer those things. So Kevin, can you move to the next slide?
Of course, yeah. Yeah,
so this is a view on what Truffle Teams will look like so far, or will look like very, very soon. So if you look at this, you can see that there's a history of transactions over time. There's a graph. You can see a comparison between transactions that have errored versus transactions that succeeded. In this example, towards the end of this graph, we're noticing that there are a lot more erroneous transactions compared to previous months. So that's a good indicator that either a version of your contract is incorrect. You've deployed a version of your front end that doesn't create the transactions correctly, or people are just go ahead and transacting against your contract in ways you don't know. So in this view, you can see more information that a developer might need to know, like gas usage, which functions are the most used. This is information that a developer can use to refine those those functions and perhaps make them less resource intensive. You can see again on the left, you can see a different graph showing which transactions succeeded and which failed. On the right, we wanted to answer the workflow question of, if you're working with a large team of developers, you will have multiple places where you deploy your application, and this includes your smart contracts. So if let's say you're trying to deploy to mainnet will be your eventual place where you deploy, but you're going to want, usually teams want at least one staging server to be able to deploy to and have other people on their team, in the company, work with that version of the software, that version of the smart contracts. Once that version is good, we want to provide you a way to promote that version to your production blockchain with the click of a button. So this is going to be fully integrated within Truffle. We're going to run your deployment scripts. We'll help you through it, and you'll be able to see what happened and be able to diagnose any issues in deployment before it actually spends any money on your production blockchain. Go ahead to the... Yep. Perfect. So we have a lot of things that we want to do with Truffle Teams. What you've seen is just the first iteration of this product. So we want to provide you with some analytics and monitoring. One flow that I love to talk about here is, let's say you have Ether, or if you're on a consortium network, the token that's used for the smart contracts, we'll call it value. You have value in your smart contract that is flowing out of your smart contract unnecessarily. We've all heard of hacks that have happened on the public network, or coding errors. And what if there was a system there monitoring this for you and that can tell you that this is happening? So for instance, let's say value's flowing out of it, you get a message from our service and you go, oh no, that's not supposed to happen. If you were a normal developer with the tools that we have available, what you would have to do is go and create a transaction, usually in the command line, that would then potentially make that stop. So if you've architected your contracts ahead of time to be, for instance, to be pausable, which is a feature of Open Zeppelin, you could make a transaction against that contract and pause it and make that value stop flowing. But this is like in the heat of the moment, right? Like value is continuing to flow out. You need to go as fast as possible. One thing here that you could do is go into Truffle Teams. We would, because everything is so integrated, we would understand the contract and what functions are available and provide that pause button there for you at a single click. There will be other monitoring features as well, targeted towards a more advanced projects. For instance, let's say value is flowing out and you can set a limit and it'll automatically pause your contract. We are going to integrate with Azure Pipelines and other continuous integration tools to help you develop your smart contracts. Continuous integration is part of Truffle Teams because it's part of the workflow from going from code to testing and staging to finally production. And integrating with continuous integration services that already exist gives you the advanced CI that you need. Again, I mentioned development and staging blockchains. We want to make those very available to you, give you the ability to create those really easily. So whether or not that's a Ganache-backed staging blockchain that we're hosting, or integrating with other platforms that provide those things, we want to make that deeply integrated into your development process. Continuous delivery, again, this is the build promotion, being able to promote one version from staging to production. Auto-generated interfaces, that's the like detecting what features are available in your contract and making those available to you. One thing that I didn't mention is full state transaction debugging. So this is the feature that I love personally, because if you were building a Web 2.0 application, there are services and features of your app that can tell you when an error happens on the back end. But they tell you when an error happens and on what line of code, but it's up to you to really reproduce it. And what's amazing about the blockchain is the whole transaction, the whole state, everything that happens exists there. So we could provide that information to you with a click of the button. You don't have to spend any time reproducing the issue. You just click the debug button, and because of the tight integration, we can show you what happens. So that's extremely exciting for developers. It's going to save tons of time for them. And then one thing I'm going to tease out is we are working very hard to integrate all of Truffle's tools, including Truffle Teams, with your favorite enterprise ledgers. These are those ledgers that provide you with private transactions, as we talked about before, potentially more throughput. But if you're an enterprise, that's extremely exciting to you, so stay tuned for that. If you want to get on the wait list of all these new features, go to truffleframework.com/teams. And Stephen, I just saw your quote, your message in chat. This looks massive. I can't wait to get started with it. Thank you. That's we're all super excited too. Thank you, Kevin.
Cool. Yeah, thank you, Tim. So same link is up there. There's a few other channels we have for raising either discussion or questions. Obviously, feel free to fire them into the chat now. If you're looking at this retrospectively, we have a Spectrum channel open at that URL, trufflesuite/truffle-teams. And then also on GitHub, you can raise issues. So while you're getting, using some of the early builds of this or early versions of this, you can go there and raise issues there. Awesome. Okay. So next up is the VS Code extension, as we were alluding to earlier. So this one's going to be kind of brief, just also, again, we're a little conscious of time. But as we kind of touched on earlier, this is pretty big in the sense that now surfaces the majority, if not all, of the Truffle features directly in VS Code as an IDE. Just as a caveat up front, there's obviously other extensions. There's been some stuff around the edges of this, but there's never been one that's as fully comprehensively kind of integrated until this one. It came out a couple of weeks ago. I think it was announced at Microsoft Build. And everything in terms of the kind of core development workflow, from creating a new project, compiling, running tests, and then deploying through to either local, a local Ganache instance, public ledger, or of course private consortium ledger as well. Just the usual ways in which you do that. Also, interestingly, excitingly, is we have Truffle debugger integration coming within the IDE. Obviously, right now it's all on the command line, which is fine, and it works. But it doesn't. It's of course better, more seamless to do it directly. Step through and all the things you do while debugging directly in the IDE itself. So that's coming soon. This extension is extremely exciting because there's a host of developers who would rather work through their IDE, their IDE of choice. VS Code is actually turning into one of the most popular IDEs of choice. And so this gives them the comfort that they need in building a blockchain application. Also, again, a visual debugger integrated with your IDE is huge for developers. Absolutely. And the way I often, just to kind of extend on that, once you get very comfortable with Truffle and, if you're an experienced command line terminal developer, which a lot of people are and do get to, well, fine. You may not need to use some of the stuff built into the IDE. But for people that are new, an IDE just provides, that level of comfort and ease with which to get started with things, and citing back to some of the earlier things about, the space growing because of the tooling maturing and so on, that, this is a great trend for that too, for that reason as well. Okay, so just rather than doing a demo on this, again, we're kind of keeping within sort of reasonably tight time constraints. We've just pulled out a bunch of screenshots of it, so you can kind of get a flavor of how it operates. This is the landing kind of welcome screen when you install the extension, or you can pull it up at any time retrospectively. There's some built-in support for deploying to Microsoft Azure managed blockchains, but you can connect to existing ones or just specify the RPC endpoint and push your stuff anywhere, push your contracts anywhere. Some screenshots from what they call the command palette, which is one of the things built into the IDE, and you can just do all the kind of major things, and you can see some of them listed there, from creating a new project, generating a stubbed out kind of UI for that, building, deploying, starting and stopping Ganache. Some of these things are not particularly hard if you're comfortable on the command line or you've been using these tools for a while already. But again, to that point, it just makes this a lot easier and more seamless, and especially with more advanced things like debugging and so on. Here you can see building. I'm going to skip through a couple of these because somewhat quickly, and then deploying. And you've got the kind of output there to the terminal, or the output tab there. Cool. So in terms of getting started with this, if you're using VS Code already, you can just go to the kind of extension tab within it and just search for, I think, Azure Block, or I can't remember the exact name off the top of my head, apologies, that you'd search for, or click on that uber long link. It's also an open source plugin or extension as well. So if you wanted to kind of raise issues, view the source code, maybe fork it to extend it for some deeper support for your service, then you can do that too, which is so the URL for the source code is there. And next up, oops, skipped ahead, is TruffleDB. So this is a little glimpse of something that we're working on at the moment. So it's basically an kind of redesign or replacement to, or enhancement to the Truffle Artifact format. Truffle Artifacts are the output when you do a compilation of your contracts, and it spits out a bunch of JSON files, one for each contract. And they store a lot of information. So they store the API, the bytecode, any networks that you've migrated your contracts to, all the information for those is stored in there as well. The source code, all of that means they get pretty big. And moreover, they don't support, there's use cases they kind of implicitly don't support. A smaller one being duplicate contract names, that just isn't supported right now. Also, dynamically updating dependencies is not supported. I pulled out a little screenshot there from Nick on the team, who raised an issue himself, saying this format isn't cutting it. So he was being very blunt, and I just kind of highlighted a couple of things there. And the solution was to build something better. So that something better is, do you want to add?
Just a little bit of color. The artifact format, the artifacts themselves are really the point of integration for anything that that integrates with Truffle or wants to use what Truffle outputs. So for instance, Drizzle consumes as artifacts, Ganache consumes as artifacts. Even our own tools are all built around those artifacts, and everybody who wants to work in the Truffle ecosystem will want to consume those. They're also expected to be used in your front end, and as you can see, this Nick is rightfully saying that that's a burden for front-end developers.
Yep. So the solution, or as Nick's referring to, or the evolution of this is something that we're calling TruffleDB. And in a nutshell, it's a GraphQL kind of layer or extension or interface on top of the underlying artifacts format. So amongst other things, it will make the querying process more kind of more expressive, more developer friendly. We say user friendly down there. I guess users being developers. More efficient, because you're not having to load the entire artifact into memory to kind of query it. Moreover, it can actually pull information from multiple sources, not just the artifacts itself. So that could be linked libraries and potentially other external services, such as Truffle Teams. Obviously, it's not going to be intrinsically tied to Truffle Teams, but other things as well. So it becomes this kind of layer, this querying layer that provides a bunch of functionality that just is implicitly not there right now. Screenshot. It's not the sexiest of screenshots, unfortunately. And this is still very much a work in progress. And this is obviously just a GraphQL query for querying an address of the deployed address of the Magic Square contract. And that's just obviously kind of raw GraphQL. Nothing particularly fancy from that. But I asked a couple of the folks that are working on this, hey, is there anything we can see? Albeit not really a very visual thing. And this is what gives you a little flavor of it. In terms of status for this, as I understand it, the kind of ETA for the kind of first release of this is the summer, also mid to late summer, I guess, because we're getting close to summer already. And we'd love for people to get involved, if you're interested, amongst a bunch of different ways, letting us know on kind of potential use cases for this, or limitations if they're not perhaps out there in the wild that you have with the current format, the current artifacts format. And also in development, if you're an open source developer or wanting to become an open source developer, and maybe you've got some solid GraphQL skills or whatever, and you want to kind of get involved, we'd love that too. And then of course, beyond that, just testing. As we kind of roll this out, we'd love, just people to test it and so on. We do have a bit more detail. So Nick, as we were referring to, has kind of put together kind of some info both on inherent current limitations and, the proposal of the solution at that, again, slightly longer URL there. So apologies for that. Cool. Okay. So next up, sorry, I always skip ahead by accident there. Kind of the final little segment before we kind of wrap up is just some of the new integrations and plugins within Truffle that we're supporting.
Yeah, so you're following what's happening with Truffle, then these are ones that you've, the first two are ledger integrations that you've already seen and already aware of. So Quorum, we've had support for years now. What I meant to mention in the last slide about Quorum is that when they followed the spec so closely, we had to, there was a joke between us where all we had to do in order to support them was to write a blog post. So because Truffle couldn't tell, the support was already baked in, which was amazing. So we've supported Quorum for quite a long time and are continuing to support them now. Stay tuned for more news on that one. Axoni is a distributed ledger technology that the biggest news there is that they are running the ledger that's going to host, I believe it's called I get this mixed up all the time. I have the CDCC, the CC stands for Clearinghouse, which will process something on the order of trillions of dollars worth of transactions for stock exchanges. So that's huge, and they are working on Truffle integration now. There was some news about that pretty recently. There are other ways to integrate with Truffle. I mentioned those artifacts to you, but there are even new ways with the additions of plugins in the plugin system. So one of the most recent plugins that I'm excited about is Roscoe Callis's Truffle Plugin Verify. So for a long time, people have been asking for the ability to verify their contracts on Etherscan to ensure that the contracts that are deployed match up with the code that exists on disk. So Roscoe built a plugin for Truffle to do that. Highly recommend you check that one out. Mythex is also using the plugin system to integrate with Truffle and run security analysis on your contracts. These are just two plugins, but we highly encourage you to write your own plugins and add the features to Truffle that you would like to see. Stay tuned for more news. We have so much exciting stuff in this integrations and plugins space that I'd love to tell you about, but it's all upcoming.
Teasing.
Right.
Cool. All right. So that kind of wraps up the bulk of the webinar, the session. Quick couple of things before we get to the kind of Q&A, if there's any outstanding questions. First one being TruffleCon 2019. So this is our second iteration of our annual conference. This year it's taking place in Seattle, or more specifically Redmond, at the Microsoft campus. And it's for users of Truffle, fans, developers, etc. Anyone who's aspiring or already building decentralized apps. We have sessions across the board. So from everything from a kind of more beginner entry-level sessions through to more advanced. Last year we had 250 attendees, 53 speakers. And this year we're on track for it to be even more, so super exciting. The URL's there, and again, apologies for all these long, should probably shorten them somehow, but we'll get them out to you. And yeah, so truffleframework.com/TruffleCon 2019, and we've got plenty more information up there. And as a discount or thank you for making your way all the way through this webinar, if you use the code DRIZZLE in all caps, you get $99 off it's a 3-day conference, which can be inferred from the duration at the top there, but you get $99 off the ticket price.
So this news that I keep teasing, TruffleCon is the place to see it. All of the exciting things that are happening are going to come together at TruffleCon. Everything happening on our side, but everything that's happening in the community, we're all going to come together. So we would love to see you there. And again, that discount code is $90 off whatever tickets are available. So there are currently early bird tickets, and you can get $99 off the early bird tickets. But if you wait, of course, it's $99 off your regular price. So urge you to buy your tickets now.
Great. Yep. Cool. So that is it for the webinar. Thank you for listening. Hopefully it was useful. As mentioned, we'll record it. So if you want to watch it again or share it on, obviously welcome that. So with that, we'll cut over to Q&A if there are any outstanding questions. I can't see the questions right now, so I'm not sure if there's any.
Yep. We have one that was asked in the chat, and the question was: Hyperledger has talked about integrating better with Ethereum 2.0, excuse me, and Truffle and Remix. Are you all on the same page with blockchain interoperability talks? Short answer is yes. So we know that Hyperledger is working to create EVM integration, and EVM integration will say similar to Quorum will make integrating much easier for us. So they're doing some amazing work there. As much as I can tease, we are also doing some work on our side to look at something deeper, but it's about as good as I can go, as far as I can go in the news so far.
Cool. Is that it in terms of questions? I'll wait a moment or two just in case there's any more. So feel free to fire them through. I can probably pull it open here as well.
So Kevin, maybe I should throw this one over to you. Someone's asking, or Kate Cloud is asking, some advice on how to get better at smart contract development. Kevin, I believe you are an important person to talk to about that.
That's correct. Yeah. So we have something called Truffle University in the works. Actually starting quite soon, but that's going to be for more like intermediate to advanced developers, at least these first few cohorts or courses that we're kicking off. That said, this is something that we're growing and evolving, and we definitely have courses in the works for, more beginners or, folks that are looking to get better at smart contract development. Of course, that can apply across the board. You might already be pretty good at it, but want to get even better. But yeah, so reach out, reply back to the email, the follow-up email you get from Liz, if you want to get put in touch with myself, and we could jump on a call to talk it through. But yeah, that I think answers that.
So, yeah, I'd love to just add that, or maybe just reiterate that the courses that we have starting at the end of the month, they are the advanced courses, but we have seen tons of interest from people that who are looking to get into the space and are just starting out in the blockchain space, and we definitely want to help you there. So yeah, please reach out to Kevin, and we will do everything we can.
Yeah, I also just saw Liz shared her email address above there as well. So,
perfect.
ping Liz first and she can connect us.
So we have a question about, do you offer internships to international students? We are looking into this. We don't have any internships at the time, but same with Truffle University, feel free to respond to the email, and we'll take it on a case-by-case basis. Any other questions?
All right. Well, with that, thanks again. And, ping us anytime with any, follow-ups to this, reply to Liz or the follow-up email. But thanks again.
All right. Thank you all. It's great to have you.